Much for joining us today for this community discussion on Indian Point and environmental justice. Like Matt said, if you can remain muted for the presentations, that'd be great. And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. And if we can't get to them during the course of the presentation, we will probably email you the responses later on. My name is Lisa Smart, she, hers. I am moderating tonight. I'm a junior at Vassar College here in Poughkeepsie. I'm majoring in anthropology with minors in sustainability and French. And this semester I had the opportunity to intern with Clearwater. So like I said, we have a very full agenda for tonight. So I'll just say now that this is just the first part in like a 3-part series that we're kind of doing. So right now we're having our community discussion. Throughout the summer, we'll have community meetings and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And then after that, in the fall, we plan to have a summit where we all come back together and discuss our findings and the work that we've done. And I think without further ado, I will hand it over to Westchester County Legislator Colin Smith, who will be doing our welcome.
Thank you, Lisa, and it's nice. Thank you, everyone. It's nice to be here this evening. Looking forward to tonight's agenda. I am going to simply be doing the introduction and definitely looking forward to hearing from our panelists this evening. A lot of good information that we will be getting this evening. And as I think, as Lisa noted, this is just, the first part of a process, an ongoing, well, not the first, but certainly part of an ongoing process. But we're definitely at somewhat of a turning point, given that the plant is now officially, or soon to be officially, shut down. So good afternoon or good evening and welcome to everyone to the 2021 Indian Point Regional Decommissioning Forum. As was stated, my name is Colin Smith. I am the Westchester County Legislator for District 1, which includes Buchanan, where the plant is located. With the closure of the reactor that occurred this past April, the second reactor, I would like to thank our state and local officials, both elected and non-elected, our community members, our local business leaders, our environmental activists, and our friends in labor for your dedication and your input throughout this process. It takes a community to make this possible and to find the right solutions. And I also would like to thank the neighboring communities for their patience as we are continuing forward in this process. As you know, we'll need all hands on deck to grow our local economy, to create jobs, to protect our environment, and to continue to support the village of Buchanan, the Hendrick Hudson School District, the town of Cortland, and of course the entire northern Westchester area. The pandemic, unfortunately, has only added several layers to this conversation, and so it's now more important than ever that we support our businesses and our individuals who have helped make it through this past year. With that, I would like to now turn this over to my longtime friend and mentor, as well as my colleague on the Board of Legislators, whose district neighbors mine. Legislator Catherine Borgia has been an advocate for our community and an active part of this process from the beginning. Of course, you all know that. And so without further ado, and of course she needs no introduction, but it's always a pleasure to be the one to introduce her. I give you the Honorable Catherine Borgia.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, everyone, for being here. As Colin mentioned, in my career in public service, I have always had the responsibility of making sure I knew what was going on Indian Point, both as an assembly staffer for Assemblywoman Sandy Gallup, whose district covers the area, which I was for about 10 years. And then for about the past 17 years, I've been an elected official, either for the past 10 years, representing the towns directly surrounding Indian Point, including across Collins district and my district. The line is actually across the street from Indian Point. So I represent the neighborhood that Indian Point sits in, as well as Cortland, Ossining, Croton, and Briarcliff Manor. So all areas that are very closely in the 10-mile zone of Indian Point. So when I first started going to NRC meetings and going to Indian Point stakeholder meetings for my boss, Assemblywoman Gallup, it was just at the time when NYPA and Con Ed had sold the plant to Entergy. At the time, it was generally seen to be a positive step forward because Entergy was a company that had resources. They there had been a lot of incidents at the plant right before the turnover to Entergy happened. And it didn't seem like the two more public utilities really had the ability to make sure that the plant was operating safely. Entergy did put a lot of money into the plant and did do a lot of things to make sure that it was a viable part of their business portfolio. Entergy's a for-profit, publicly traded business, and all the decisions that they make are in light of their fiduciary responsibility to their company and to their shareholders. So one of the things that I think we have to think about when we think about Indian Point is the fact that as a nation, we don't really have a plan for how we are going to handle the eventual and inevitable closing of the nuclear power plants that we have around the country. When the decommissioning deal was announced, one of the things that we in the local municipalities did was to reach out to other municipalities, other counties and states, and nearby that had gone through the decommissioning process. And what we found was there's different areas of responsibility, but nobody really looking at the whole of what we need to do. Now, when you look back at why Entergy does no longer wish to run Indian Point, it's because as a business, there's too much money that they have to put in for repairs. Manager said to me, look at the list of disasters that have happened at Indian Point. And as I was scrolling through Google, I was like, oh, I cannot believe how many things have happened at this site. And and the acceleration of things that go wrong as a plant ages is, of course, going to mean that it's going to take more and more money to operate safely, and we're going to generate more and more spent fuel, and there's no plan at a national level to deal with that spent fuel. So how we got here is that it is no longer economically viable for a for-profit company to run a nuclear power plant. And I think what we're going to see as, plants age and, the next decade or 2 decades, we're going to see this a lot. It's like when you have a car, you can keep your car running. Your car runs great the first 5 years. The second 5 years, you can keep it running by keeping it, the maintenance going, keeping it up to date. But after a while, the cost of repairs are no longer make the car economically viable for you to keep. And that's where we are right now. The plant is safer because it's not generating energy anymore. However, the things that need to happen after the decommissioning, not only immediately, not only restoring the site, not only following the NRC guidelines, not only making sure that economically the communities of Cortland and the school district, the Hen Hud School District and Westchester County and all the surrounding areas are not hurt economically or environmentally, we also have to think about what is the long range, really long range, 100-year, 200-year, 300-year plan. So that's how we got here. That's the stuff we're looking at. I think that, when we think about all of the things that we need to do, we have to make sure that this power plant is the benchmark, the prototype for how to do this safely and well. We deserve it, as those of us who I lived for about 28 years, 7 miles from Indian Point. 2 years ago, I moved a mile north, so now I live 6 miles from Indian Point. So those of us who live in the surrounding area, but also how we do it as a nation. And that I think is really the question that we need to have answered. So we're going to talk a lot about the specifics. Manager Joe and other experts are going to talk about the specifics of what's going to happen. But I think when we're having our conversations, especially in our breakout groups, we have to think at the 10,000 foot level as well as the 10-foot level where we live.
We're going to have Erin Mayer and Reverend Dr. Gregory Simpson talk a little bit about ensuring environmental and climate justice.
And it is really an honor to be a part of this panel. one minor little edit in my title here. I'm the past national president of the Sierra Club in 57. So like we count the numbers with national presidents. We do that also with the Sierra Club. But I'm also a pioneer and founder of what is now the national and international environmental justice movement. My brother, Bob Bullock, they called him the father of the EJ movement, or George Washington. Well, with me, you're looking at the Alexander Hamilton of the movement. I'm the Federalist. I'm the one that built the bridges and network with mainstream environmental groups, as well as building the grassroots works to network and build up the force and power within disempowered frontline communities. A little bit about me. Born and raised in the Hudson Highlands in Peekskill, New York. My father was amongst those men who were at the Peekskill riots. He was one of those UAW labor organizers, World War II veteran. The reason why we were up in northern Westchester is because men who had GI Bill, big build contracts like Frederick Trump, denied men like my father the right to have a mortgage and live within the metro area. So what he did was he was able to find property and move to Peekskill, New York. So that's how my family got rooted there. My mom was a nurse at the VA hospital in Montrose. And you know about those crazy Harlem World War II black vets, you know, they wooed her and the rest is history. But the long and short of it is I grew up in the shadow of my formative years of Indian Point. I learned to swim in the Hudson River well before the Clean Water Act. I got my share and load and dose of the various toxins as a frontline disempowered resident in that community. At that time, did not know about the risk of exposure, but so did we all within that community. And as a frontline community, you know, knowledge is power. And I've spent my years in my professional development. In fact, I just recently retired as an epidemiologist from the New York State Department of Health. So I have a public health professional hat. Now I can say things about the state health department that I would have been forever barred to say. But as a public health professional, as an EJ professional, environmental justice professional, again, what is environmental justice real quick? It is about the equal treatment of people of color under the law. The justice piece is not separate treatment. It's not special treatment. It's not Black environmentalism. No, it is demand, as in all things of full citizenship in society, is the equal treatment of a people, regardless of their economic race, color, class, or whatever status. And one of the things that we find in the power of privilege and white privilege that's now the centering points that we're talking about right now in the post-Trump era is the power of race, power in politics, and influence. And the siting of Indian Point was about power and influence. It's not sited down near White Plains or any of the other areas where there are affluent, more affluent communities. Peekskill has, in Buchanan, that area of Montrose, have always been those working class, very struggling communities historically. It sits on what was a recreational asset that was converted to this industrial use. So it took a major recreational asset that served all these communities, and it was repurposed for this industrial purpose. At that time when it was built, there was a lot of faith in the atomic age, and everything from cars, everything centered around imagery on the positivity of atomic use and atomic this and atomic that. But, you know, again, as the science about the effects of radiation were pretty much kept from the public, but later good science brought that to the public, we understood and learned of the risk. I am a duck and cover child, in which we were worried about if there was a Soviet attack. Indian Point was one of those infrastructure resources that they would attack. And so therefore, not only did you have to worry about the fear of radiation, but you were not only a frontline community for at risk, but you're also a frontline community in the Cold War during that point in time. So in short, Peekskill and the surrounding area has always borne a special burden. But one of the critical issues in which I testified at the federal hearing that Clearwater had managed to secure with the Energy Regulatory Commission was the analysis of the EJ impact on communities immediately there and within the 50-mile radius. And I did an analysis of the roads, road infrastructure, the class and cast of people, and those who were institutionalized, non-institutionalized by race, et cetera. And then looking at the roads and the bandwidth of the roads to hold a mass migration should there be an emergency event. And I was able to, under oath, testify to the community that Peekskill not only was at significant risk because it would be ground zero, but also surrounding communities. But because of its socioeconomic status, it was at a unique disadvantage in that any so-called plan that allowed for people to drive away, it assumed that people had cars. And so just an analysis of then of the 2010 census, you would understand very quickly a lot of people did not have cars. There was also the Hispanic population. There was the issue of language proficiency, or whether or not they understood the signs and the imagery that was going to be communicating any disaster awareness or alert. There was a large senior citizen population that were there. And again, the recommendation was shelter in place, which was really asking the affluent who would have the means to quickly evacuate, but those who were poor and people of color and elderly would have to somehow shelter in place. And that presented a unique burden solely almost distributed by age, poverty, and class. And when you control for race, the blacks and browns of the Peekskill and those within that immediate 12-mile area would be at a unique risk. So when we talk about environmental racism is when we talk about all these great public policies and plans that sound okay, and that we can get, as they say, something through. When you apply it, and if it disproportionately it puts another population or a particular population's advantage, we call that an injustice. And when it particularly ends up with the burden falling upon brown and black people, we call that environmental racism, because again, it follows a historic public policy pattern that truly leaves and thinks about these communities last. And I'm glad that the legislator, Catherine Borgia, talked about who is the company accountable to? And it's not to the people, and it's not even to the government. It's to their shareholders and their profits and their bottom line. That's a very, very important point. And one of the biggest causes of racism is the economic struggle and economic inequality. When these companies have their profits versus the benefit and health impacts of a community, and then that of a historically Black and now Latino community, we find that they come in last. And so not only is it not a factor that, oh, they're putting in money and we got to be worried about that. No, we do not. Every elected official, you're a representative, you represent the will of the people, of the elected in the communities that are there. Your job is there to not only to bring justice, but to enforce and create laws. And if there are gaps in the laws with regards to protection, it is your job not to look out for the interests of the shareholders of a private sector company, but your job, the moral duty, is to the citizens and people within that county. And I lift that up because when we talk about environmental injustice, many of these are the byproducts of a failing democracy. Our civil society, when it comes to the convenience and incentives for corporate interests, it puts the interest of the average citizen, regardless of wealth and status, second. But when it definitely comes to the disempowered and the weakest, because they don't make the donations and they're not going to be able to, as I say, have their freedom articulated well, they are often left aside into the curb. So I think that when we talk about the 5-foot level, and this conference today is on environmental justice and hence justice in the equal treatment of people of color under the law and respect for them as all citizens, then the justice piece dictates what is in the interest of these frontline communities and their risk. What are the health protocols? And if there are gaps in the health protocols and protections that are there, then what is the county and municipalities doing just in case there is an accident, whether prior, but we've raised the question of during the shutdown and the question of the closure after. What are the risks? The burden is not whether or not it is expensive. The companies, all companies get into something to make a profit. And so in other words, they have a vicious incentive to do the very least if that's going to save them $1 or a coin. That's not a burden, and that's not unfair. That is a material economic choice. Residents, however, they, because of the mortgage and because of their lives and investment in the community, their lives are in that community. So you cannot make valued one because they're paying dollars and the others that are living their lives. Dollars can never equate and match to lives. Your job is basically to protect the human health and value of the human lives and the quality of their lives in that community. We're going to talk about the discount because one of the big burdens for that whole region is the real estate impact with regards to that plant being there. all the properties and the equity of people's properties in and around in the community surrounding that plant take a monetary hit and loss of valuation because that facility is there. And even whether it is active or inactive or being decommissioned, the fact of the matter is historic contamination of the groundwater and ground soil around it remain. And those who enjoy the waterfront still have to deal with radioactive and tainted sediments that can, again, the Hudson River is famous because it goes both ways. So that is still constantly a worry about moving, how that's being handled. So there are a lot of other issues which I want to go into, but I want to point out that companies like Entergy, they saw an investment opportunity, and nuclear has historically been documented as unsafe, and unfortunately, the management, and when you look at the record and the track record with regards to the violations, etc., it's not so much the expense. The issue is that they cut corners. The issue is that, you know, in cutting expense, you create more risk. So that's not something to pity them at the 50,000 foot level. The 50,000 foot level, we want to talk about the maximum impact on all residents, you know, within a 50-mile radius at the 50,000 foot level. But at the 5 foot level, we want to make sure the frontline communities are not put at unique risk because of their poverty, race, and color. That is the just thing to do. That is the environmental justice consideration. And the issue on why there isn't money right now in the kitty to deal with that is because these very corporate interests had lobbied to make sure that these buckets on maintenance, repair, and cleanup are funded at the minimum and structured in such a way that they can actually control them, not put in, as they say, in an independent oversight interest to make sure the cleanups are effective and done well. So at the 0 foot level, we want to make sure that the dollars and the politicians are lobbying for the dollars and fighting for the resources for the most effective community impact and cleanup that will benefit immediately the residents and community within the 0 to 5 foot level, as well as the collective county and those within the 50,000 foot level of living within a 50-mile radius. I thank you. I apologize for going over, but I think we want to have a proper frame politically as we talk about the environmental aspects as well. Thank you.
I believe Reverend Dr. Gregory Simpson is going to follow up with that.
So thank you everybody for the opportunity to present and to our political legislators. You know, so good that you could be a part of this discussion. Unfortunately, I'm having some power problems up in Kingston where I am. My computer is going in and out, so I think the safest thing for me to do is run on the phone. Unfortunately, that means that I won't have the video. But having said that, I just want to let everybody know that, you know, where I come into this conversation, I come in both as a organic chemist and as a pastor. Over the last 6 months or so, we saw in the Hudson Valley a paucity of opportunity for people of color to lift their voices on issues of environmental injustices. And in October of 2020, we decided to form, I co-founded an organization called the Hudson Valley Environmental Justice Coalition with the simple mandate, 2 simple mandates. One is to lift the voices of people of color on issues of environmental justice in the region. And the other is to educate as many people about some of the challenges that we're faced with. My good friend Aaron Mayer was a part of those conversations and presented incredible information about environmental justice on, you know, from its history, just so what you heard a while ago and beyond that. But one of the key things that I think we need to always be mindful of is that environmental justice issues are a matter of communities and community engagement. The closing of the Indian Point is or can be considered also closure to various types of opportunities. It's not direct opportunities, but peripheral opportunities within the community. And therefore, spaces and places that permit kind of transitioning into new opportunities of employment are going to be of dire need, of critical need. I want to just reiterate that a lot of environmental justice issues that, as I understand them to evolve around place-based racism, and not only place-based racism, but as Aaron speaks to all the time, issues of inequities, economic inequities and injustices. To be very clear, my role here right now is more from the perspective of recognizing that voices need to be lifted at the micro population level. We need to hear and understand very clearly what the needs of these communities will be as the decommissioning rolls out. As I understand it, this could take anywhere from 10 up to 10 years to be completed, which means that there will be some kind of opportunity for people to engage, but also a better opportunity for us to understand some of the threats that are going to be posed to individuals who don't have opportunities to be part of that decommissioning process from the perspective of jobs. So, with that, I would, in an interest of time, I'll just turn back over to our moderator, Lisa, and, happy to field questions as we go on. Thank you.
Thank you to you both. Now, Mana Jo Green, our Environmental Action Director, will present and give a bit of an overview on decommissioning, the dangers of decommissioning, the license transfer, alternative options. So Mana.
I'm here, and I am going to, first of all, thank everyone who has spoken before and set a context. And let me just, there we go. One of the purposes of this project is to educate the broader community. Many of our elected officials are pretty well educated from the various forums and briefings that we have put on since, really since 9/11. And now we are at a place where the era of nuclear power is winding down, and at Indian Point, as of April 30th, all the reactors are closed, and we are moving into the age of nuclear waste. And as Catherine said, there really isn't a good national plan. We went into nuclear power generation without really knowing what we were going to do about the vast amount of nuclear waste that is generated by these facilities. I'm going to take a minute to just explain something that I didn't understand for 10 years of working on this issue. This gentleman is holding a nuclear fuel pellet. Those pellets are then poured into a sheath, and that's what is called a fuel rod. And those fuel rods are then affixed into a fuel assembly and put into the reactor. And he's able to hold this safely in his hand. But after they go through the process of fission and the high amount of energy that is generated, mainly in the form of heat, that is then, that heat boils water to steam and turns a turbine to generate electricity. Very expensive and dangerous way of generating electricity. But the point is, he can hold one pellet safely before it goes into the reactor, coming out of the reactor after it goes through this fission reaction process, creates a lethal dose of radiation that would kill him or anyone that was unprotected in seconds. And that this is what nuclear fission looks like in a graphic. And it's just really to tell you that when the neutron starts this nuclear fission process, a great deal of energy is released, and it's an ongoing, expanding process. And so keep that in mind when you think about the reactor closing. Yes, we're not generating more waste, we're not generating electricity, and we're not at risk from a problem in the reactor. But we are still at risk from the fuel pools and very much at risk from the 2,000 tons of nuclear waste stored on site and the decommissioning process. So this is the reactor that has, here you go, that where the fission takes place, and there are other buildings that are also associated with it. And this is the fuel pool here. This is what it looks like with racks to store the spent fuel assemblies. They're called spent, but they're, as I explained, very, very highly radioactive. And after they're there for anywhere from 5 to, in the case of Indian Point, more than 40 years, the fuel assemblies will be moved out of the reactor into dry cask storage. I'll show you a little bit more about that. So all of that is going on while the plant is open and after it closed. And so now we're in a state of closure, but decommissioning itself has not yet started. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission defines 3 forms of decommissioning. Decon, which is rapid dismantling of the facility, and that's what Holtec is going to do. Safe store, which could take up to 60 years to complete, 40 years of just essentially mothballing the plant and letting the decommissioning trust fund grow, and then using the last 20 years to actually decommission the facility. And then entombment, and the only example I know of that is Chernobyl, where problems are being discovered as we speak, but it's basically just covering everything in concrete. So, and on the bottom left is a graphic about high burnup fuel. For the last decade, we've been using super enriched fuel, which is more radioactive and hotter in temperature. So there are dangers to the rapid decommissioning, or decon, worker exposure, particularly when they're dismantling or cutting pieces apart, that releases dust and vapors, and should be very closely monitored at the site. Right now, the monitoring is at the perimeter of the site, not where the work will be going on. And also in the community at large, there's a nearby elementary school that really should be monitored. So there's potential contamination to the community at large, and there could be higher cleanup costs, but given how rushed the decommissioning that Holtec is planning, you know, that may not be the case. Their whole idea is quick and dirty and keep what's left in the decommissioning fund. But on the right are some pictures of what decommissioning actually looks like. There is an in-between between mothballing a facility for 40 years and trying to rush it closed in 3 to 5 years. And this is what we think is the responsible way, is to design a plan that is the safest possible alternative, and that it could take up to 20 years, but it takes into account all of the protections that need to be put into place. And there are certain designs that have been created that could possibly be used at Indian Point. We want to store it as safely as possible for high burn up fuel and for exposure to the contaminated internals. The recommendation is 8 to 10 years. And then ultimately, we want to restore the site to unrestricted use, but given the groundwater contamination and the soil contamination, it doesn't look like that's likely to happen. One good use of Indian Point might be a very large solar system with battery backup, because it has all the right wiring, et cetera. And that could turn it into something positive. But I don't know that it'll ever be able to return to unrestricted use. We'll see what happens. And to be very careful about the dangers of transportation. And we have created a decommissioning oversight board, which Matt will be talking about in a minute. The fuel can be stored vertically in independent spent fuel storage installation. The configurations are either vertical or horizontal. They can be above ground on a concrete pad. They can be subterranean. And this is pointing out that Holtec, and really throughout the US, uses canisters that are 1/2 to 5/6 of an inch thick. But in Europe and other places around the world, they use much more robust canisters that are 10 to 20 inches thick, and often in a hardened building as well as in a robust canister. So that's something that we're hoping the decommissioning board will look into. I mentioned hardened on-site storage. What we're currently using is the configuration of bowling pins. That is the concrete casts on a concrete pad, somewhat vulnerable to terrorism. But remember, some of these designs took place after 9/11, and this is a bermed configuration where they are dispersed around the property rather than clustered. And that's called hardened on-site storage. The dangers of transportation, look up in the upper right-hand corner. That is one transport cask filled with highly radioactive nuclear fuel. And it takes a tractor trailer in the front and a tractor trailer in the back, and it can travel about 3 to 5 miles an hour. And we have hundreds of sites around the country that each have thousands of tons of radioactive material that would be transported across the country if Holtec's plans go through. The cadaver in the middle is Yucca Mountain. That is just not going to happen. It's not geologically sound, but there is there are other dangers. The weight could cause a bridge collapse, and I mentioned terrorism. And then with Yucca Mountain or any repository, national repository, that's called geological disposal. And this is a graphic of how hot the underground, how much radioactivity and heat would occur underground in 70 years, in 4,000 years, and in almost 9,000 years. The thermal plume is 50,000 years before it returns to normal. And the radiotoxicity would last for multi-millions of years. These are the potential routes to Yucca Mountain, but there's also the potential for consolidated interim storage, and one of those facilities is owned by Holtec in New Mexico, and there's another facility nearby in Texas. And you can see how many communities across the country would be at risk if this waste is moved off-site. So that's all the more reason why we have to find the safest possible way of managing on-site. I mentioned the casts and canisters. Emergency planning must continue during decommissioning. There was no mention of the high pressure Algonquin pipelines that are running under and near the plant. There was no attention to storage or transport of high burnup fuel, highly enriched, I mentioned that. Changes in management and staffing, we really are supporting as much worker retention, and that's pretty well been worked out at this point. Holtec's financial competency is being dealt with in the joint proposal as best as is possible, and probably as well as anywhere in the country through this joint proposal. But there are a lot of other technical problems to be dealt with, and especially the soil and groundwater air quality monitoring. These are some.
Yeah, so as Mana pointed out, we've been working on in relation to this is the Decommissioning Oversight Board. And this has been an evolving process for the past few years. There are community advisory panels that have existed in the past for when things like this happen, but not exactly this. We have really not seen this before. And because of that, we have seen that we needed a new type of community and government interaction to take place. What that has turned into is the Decommissioning Oversight Board, which brings together the relevant state party actors from the different state agencies, the elected officials from the area of each nuclear plant that will be in the process of decommissioning. And we'll bring on experts and we'll bring on activists and folks who care from the community to be a part of the process. And that's exactly what we've been doing. Clearwater's main thing is, as a grassroots organization, bringing folks into the process for something big happening to their own communities, like the decommissioning of a plant. And that is what we'd like to see the Decommissioning Oversight Board do. It's already been announced, the folks who are going to be on it, the structure. It's going to be run by the Public Service Commission. It's going to have all those relevant agencies. It's going to have all these people. And the main focus of what it's going to do is it's going to serve as a bridge between that entity of the state and the community members who might be a little nervous about a plant decommissioning near their house. We're hoping that the board, which will meet at minimum 3 times a year, will do so in fiscal austerity and with concern for the public welfare. And Clearwater is going to be doing all we can to ensure that both of those qualities are what the decommissioning becomes all about.
It's good to be with you all. I'm Paul Gallet from Riverkeeper, and I think it's important to start talking generally about replacement energy and then give a lot of numbers, and to do it all in 7 minutes as I've been requested to. A decade of planning for Indian Point's closure has been carried out, and it's ready New York to pivot to safe and sustainable alternatives. The state's Public Service Commission began closure preparations in 2012, ordering local utilities to study potential alternatives. Then in 2016, New York adopted a clean energy standard, requiring a ramp up to 50% renewable energy by 2030. In 2018, the Public Service Commission ordered utilities to triple their energy efficiency programs. And that's a huge issue. Those of you who are focused on renewable energy and not energy efficiency is the silent workhorse, the unloved but valiant way in which we've made progress to date, and which we will continue to make progress. Energy efficiency in and of itself is going to replace Indian Point's power more than once. Most significantly, New York put itself in a position to be a national energy policy leader in 2019 by enacting the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And I hope you all know these figures by heart, but they're good to say again and again so we don't forget them. It requires 6,000 megawatts of solar by 2025, 3,000 megawatts of energy storage by 2030, a 70% transition to renewable electricity by 2030, 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035, 100% zero emission electricity by 2040, an 85% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 as part of a 100% net zero GHG policy by that same year. In 2019, the state stayed busy. They imposed a tough new peaker plant rule requiring air pollution cuts and driving closure of a number of old, inefficient fossil fuel-based power generators. 2020 brought additional energy efficiency mandates, helping the state to go from 1% energy demand reduction a year. And nationally, I think we've cut power demand by 7% despite the growth in population and economy in the last decade. Plus, there's been a new state law to expedite the siting of large renewable energy projects and provide benefits to host communities. So it's a pretty robust set of policies that have, and this is the numbers part, all told, renewable energy and efficiency measures initiated since the January 2017 signature of the closure agreement, and now either in operation or actively under development, will contribute over 52,000 gigawatt hours annually by 2025, enough green power and demand reduction to close Indian Point more than 3 times over. And nearly another Indian Point's worth of offshore wind is under contract to be built by 2028. So going through those numbers in some more detail, because again, numbers count here, in the 4 years since the closure agreement, there's been about 13,000 gigawatt hours combined of additional energy efficiency and renewable energy based on the state grid operator, New York Independent System Operator, also known as NYISO, based on their Gold Book, which is their data set. Essential if you really want to understand these issues to have a look at the Gold Book that they issued late last month. Total additional energy efficiency savings that are bolted in for 2021 to 2025, another 12,000 gigawatt hours. So that's a cumulative 25,000 gigawatt hours in total renewable energy and energy efficiency between 2017 and 2025. Then additional renewables from 2021 to 2025 without offshore wind, another 19,000 gigawatt hours. That's more than Indian Point. Indian Point's roughly 16,000 gigawatt hours. We're up to a cumulative 44,000 gigawatt hours in total renewable energy and energy efficiency between 2017 and 2025. That's nearly 3 Indian Point equivalents. Offshore wind will go into effect some by 2024, most after 24. And that puts us up to a combined cumulative renewable energy and energy efficiency figures starting the day we got busy after the Indian Point closure agreement was signed and going through 2028 of 65,000 gigawatt hours, and that's equal to over 4 Indian Points. So will this all happen in and of itself? Of course not. Are we all duty bound and honor bound, having closed Indian Point, to make sure these things happen, to make sure the projects get cited, to make sure that the contracts that are being entered into by the state with the folks who are going to deliver energy storage, offshore wind, transfer of power from upstate to downstate, they all have to get done. And we all have that responsibility to be involved in that process. So again, we got started a little late with this presentation. There's a lot of folks left to speak. I'm going to stay within my time and turn it back over, I think, to Lisa so that she can bring the other speakers in.
Thank you so much again, Paul Gallay. I know that the question of replacement energy has been a recurring question for a lot of people. So yes, I will turn it back over again to Vanessa Agudelo from Peekskill.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I just want to thank the organizers for bringing us together and convening this incredibly important conversation around Indian Point and just environmental justice more broadly. As an elected representative from the closest environmental justice community, I, like many people here, are incredibly relieved to be seeing the closure of Indian Point, which was the oldest operating nuclear power plant in the country and the only nuclear power plant in America with 2 42-inch fracked gas pipelines laying adjacent to its facilities. Now, if this sounds like an incredibly bad idea, it's because it was, and our community, Peekskill, knew this. And we attempted to ring the alarm back when the expansion of these pipelines were first proposed in 2015 and 16, but construction went ahead, and it wasn't until years after they were in operation that authorities acknowledged the danger that it posed. Seemingly too late to do anything, or at least that's what they've told us, since nothing has yet to be done. And it's for these reasons that we find ourselves needing to be vigilant when dealing with institutions who are tasked with ensuring that our community's health and safety are not sidelined by for-profit corporations who ultimately care about their bottom line and the profit to be made, because we are already living with the impacts of this happening time and time again. And as was mentioned by Erin earlier, it's typically environmental justice communities like mine, Black and Brown communities, that are targeted by these corporations for these kinds of projects that produce detrimental impacts, despite the fact that we're already in the worst position to protect ourselves from these health burdens created from having polluters in our backyard in the first place. And in Peekskill, we are all too familiar with these burdens and have had to suffer from the weight of them for decades. Now, I represent one of the poorest cities and one of the richest counties in the country, and the disparity is striking. It's no coincidence that in Peekskill, we are home to several major sources of air pollution in our area. The Wheelbrader plant that incinerates all of Westchester County's garbage, as well as that of surrounding tri-state cities such as Greenwich, sits in Peekskill and is the #1 polluter in the county by about 6 times over. And we know that this air pollution has been deadly for our residents who have been suffering from asthma at alarmingly high rates. In fact, our rate of asthma-related emergency department visits is more than 4 times as high as nearby Somers, and we hold the highest infant mortality rate in Westchester County as well. And the nuclear power plant and the 2 fracked gas pipelines that run through our city only make matters worse. The danger that we are subject to is shockingly disproportionate of that of our wealthier counterparts down county. But unfortunately, it's these realities that don't get sufficiently talked about. And we need to acknowledge these realities, because otherwise those in power will continue to make the same mistakes, and our community's health and safety will suffer as a consequence. That's why, as a leader, I believe it is our responsibility that we ensure that we not only center those who are most directly impacted by these issues and have the most at stake, but also make them an integral part of the decision-making process. That's why I was incredibly disheartened to see how the license transfer process with the NRC and PSC rolled out. Despite numerous concerns being raised around Holtec's long history of malfeasance, safety violations, financial misdealings, bribery, and corruption, authorities moved forward with the transfer, and the public in many ways was sidelined and ignored. Even calls for public hearings to NRC were also ignored. So it's for these reasons and many others that it gives me kind of very little hope for what an oversight board can truly accomplish if it's not given the serious teeth it needs to truly have real oversight, and if it's not truly representative of the people who have the most at stake, so that environmental justice communities like ours don't get shortchanged. And when I say that this board needs to be representative, I don't mean a board that is represented by elected officials who are who have been elected to represent these communities, because I can tell you that as a local elected, I am subject to a ton of pressure and influence from my peers in higher offices. And though I can personally say that I pledge not to succumb to this kind of pressure, it's not something that we should be leaving up for chance, especially when you take into into account the nature of being in office. And for these reasons, it's so critically important that we have residents on the board who are not running for office, who are not worried about donors, who are not worried about making enemies, people who are truly in these communities, who live in these communities, who have been facing these impacts for so long, and who have the most at stake. They're the ones, it's their voices that deserve to be at the table, and it's their concerns that need to be considered when we're making these decisions. And I know that, and this goes as far as even addressing kind of the current status of our board. It's my understanding that we do currently have one representative on the board who is representing the environmental issues for our site here at Indian Point. And that's a representative from Riverkeeper. And although we deeply appreciate all the work that Riverkeeper has done, I do think that we are falling short if we're not asking where the representation from the community is coming from. How are we ensuring that the people who are living here are at the table and are in a place to be able to make decisions to ensure that their safety, the safety of their families, and the safety of their neighbors are truly centered here. And so those are the concerns that I think we as the city of Peekskill want to address moving forward. And I think we need to continue to ask these questions, continue to demand transparency, continue to demand that there be benchmarks around what is taking place with this board, how they are doing, and to ensure that the community is deeply representative. And of course, even kind of zooming out of this decommissioning process, we need to take kind of this principle as a strategy when we're looking towards a truly 100% renewable future, right? We need to find ways to build real public power so that our well-being is centered instead of profit margins. And one of the most effective ways of doing that is going to be putting utilities under public ownership, so they're truly meeting the needs of the public, and again, not meeting the needs of for-profit companies and shareholders whose bottom line is again the profit that is there to be made, and not the health and safety of the communities that they are impacting. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Lisa, and I'm looking forward to our breakout group in just a short time to continue to discussing how we can work together to address these issues.
Thank you so much again, Councilmember Vanessa Agudelo. Next, we have Karen Mejia, a councilmember from Newburgh.
Hey guys, buenas noches. My name is Karen Mejia, council member from the city of Newburgh. And in true Newburgh style, I'm gonna give a shout out and ask to join me as well, my co-conspirator, council member Anthony Grice. So I'll start by kicking it off. Man, I am so glad, Aaron, that you are retired and that you are free to voice your opinion and ditto what you said, right? Ditto what Vanessa said and all of the other speakers as well. I know I want to spend most of my time time in our small group, right, for the next action, because I think everybody here, if you're showing up on a Wednesday at 7 p.m. to hear us discuss and give updates, you're in and you're ready to take action, right? City of Newburgh, we are about 30,000 predominantly majority, super majority Black and brown here, contaminated water, contaminated housing stock, you name it, we have it. And so how does the closure of Indian Point impact us? What I wanted to spend some time focusing on was the pressure, right, that I feel our community is facing around the closure, right, with this pressure to repower Dan Scammer, right? Like that's where the pressure for our area is coming. It's like, okay, Indian Point is closing. Hey, Dan Scammer, we got to turn it on and repower it. And so that's, I think, the pressure, right? Aside from all the, we talked about and have already brought forward all of the, environmental injustices, right? And just, insert City of Newburgh instead of peak scale, switch off some of the players and we're there. With that in mind, I'm going to just quiet down a little bit. And again, right, because it takes more than one individual on a board to pass legislations and fill in these gaps. I want to open it up to my co-conspirator, Councilmember Grice, to just chime in a bit as well.
So thank you for that, Councilmember Mejia. And she said it just right. It really just takes a lot of coalition to be able to fight this fight, because when you're doing it, you rest assured that the powers that be, that those companies that are in charge, if you give them 99 reasons to why they should be doing something different, they're going to give you 100 reasons of why they're doing the right thing. So you just have to make sure that you have the support of your colleagues and that you are getting the community support, just like Vanessa said. The other thing that I want to tell the community, because it is always good to have that data, what I call the scientific approach, but you also want to have that qualitative data, that lived experience. So if you're out there, if you're watching this and you say, well, I don't have command of all of the facts like Matt had or like Aaron had, that's okay. Take a breath, pause, and then, because when you're going up against them, you can say something very, very simple, like stop Dan Scammer. You could say something very, very simple, like Indian Point, they need to take their time with their decommissioning. You don't have to have all of that vocabulary. Then you can say, when I lived, and that was Aaron's, and I hope he doesn't mind that I'm using him twice as an example, but that was Aaron's experience, that, hey, I swam in the Hudson River. I did this and I did that. It's that lived experience. And trust me, that makes a big impact also. So as we go to I'm not sure what's next, and I did get the agenda. But as we go to the breakout sessions, please ask all of the questions that you want to. If we don't know the answers, we will be sure to get the answers to you. And then for everybody on the panel, you guys are awesome and amazing. And I just want to take this time to thank you now.
So back to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much for our representatives from Newburgh. We have Rockland County Legislator Harriet Cornell next to continue speaking on behalf of Haverstraw and Nyack.
I'm Harriet Cornell. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate. This has all been totally fascinating. For those of us who believe with all our hearts that protection of the environment is the greatest good we can support, we throw ourselves into fights against projects that are antithetical to our goals. As a legislator, I've jumped into the fray against pipelines or fracking proposals that have come my way. But my first real fight was to close Indian Point. That was the first major issue I got involved with when I became a Rockland County legislator in 1984. I submitted a resolution to basically close Indian Point. And before I knew it, I was appointed the chair of the commission. It was, at the time, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had a different name, and I don't really remember what they were called at that time, but the rule was that the only way you could fight Indian Point was if you could prove or argue that the plan of evacuation was impossible or difficult. And that's what we did. We thought successfully, but obviously it didn't work. The roads on the west side of the Hudson up near Indian Point are all very narrow and windy, and definitely not suitable for fast evacuations. The commission had put out, or the company had put out a plan of evacuation, and amongst their issues was that they were going to send school buses into the schools and take them to various sites, one of which was in New Jersey. I took it upon myself to call the schools in New Jersey and only to find out that they knew nothing about this and they weren't prepared to accept students at all. So that was what we were working with at the time. Our congressman arranged for me to go to Washington, where I met with the nuclear regulatory people. So I was very involved with Indian Point from the very beginning. And now some 37 years later, I'm faced with the reality of dealing with the difficult issues of what to do with the product that no one wants, and that's spent fuel, and how to ensure sufficient power for our region, and how to protect those who can't afford increased costs for energy or anything else for that matter. Recently, I was asked to serve on a focus group for a not-for-profit organization that some of you may be aware of. It's called PULP, Public Utility Law Project. It's, as I said, it's based in Albany, and they represent low-income people who are threatened with having their power turned off or their water turned off because they can't pay their bills. And, you know, this is during this, to prepare really for that focus group, I did a lot of talking with the people who work with the communities in Haverstraw, which are primarily people who are Spanish-speaking people. And then also in Nyack, where there are many, many people of communities of color. And it was sort of shocking to really hear what happens when people are unable to go to school. For example, the girls embarrassed to go because they were not able to, or their family was not able to buy the kinds of soap and things that made them feel as if they were in the best hygiene and the best kinds of clothes to wear. So these two communities, certainly Haverstraw and Nyack, and also Stony Point, which wasn't included, are really important. But in any event, I remember as if it were yesterday when I was 10 or 11 years old, living on the South Shore of Long Island, and my parents took me to New York City, where we boarded the Hudson River Dayliner and headed up the Hudson to a very magical place. It was named Indian Point. It was really a grand amusement park with rides, a swimming pool, a dance hall, swings, slides, and speedboat rides. And it was a wonderful place for people to see the country, as it were. So we know what happened to Indian Point. That's why we're here right now. So now as a legislator, I not only worry about the many problems faced by current residents, as if the pandemic had not been enough, but I also worry about the people 20 or 30 or 60 years from now. I didn't get to the 300 mark. I think it was Vanessa who talked about that, but it's really the idea that people will see this green field, because that's much of what they're talking about now, is to turn it into green fields, overlooking the magnificent Hudson, and not knowing that buried below is spent fuel that is still radioactive. So that is really one of the, that is actually one of the alternate solutions that's currently being discussed with regard to transporting or burying spent fuel casks. We had a presentation in the legislature from our emergency services, fire and emergency services people who've been attending meetings on the decommissioning, and that is definitely one of the alternate solutions, which is to keep and to bury the spent fuel casks. So I think I'm going to really stop now. There's been a lot of discussion and I don't want to go over my time, but I just wanted to thank Clearwater for really driving us to think through the options and to ensure to the best of our ability a safe and just process. And this is just the beginning, this meeting tonight and some that have taken place before. It's just the beginning. It's going to be a long haul. And I would certainly like to see the lists of the names of the people who are serving on the task force that was mentioned earlier. I don't know what it was called. The Oversight Board. So that is something I would like to see, the names of the people who have been appointed to that board. And thank you very much again for having me. And that's the end of my talk.
Thank you again, Legislator Harriet Cornell. We will probably email out all answers to questions that aren't addressed during the course of this meeting. So next we have Councilmember Amber Grant from Beacon.
Hi, thank you. As Lisa mentioned, I'm a council member in the city of Beacon. Beacon is directly across the Hudson River from Newburgh in southern Dutchess County. So we are not necessarily the closest community, but we are an environmental justice community. I'm going to be super brief because we are way behind schedule, but as Karen mentioned, I also share immediate concerns about the rebuilding of the Dan Scammer energy plant. This will be a fossil fuel burning plant that operates 24/7. It will be in Newburgh's backyard, but just across the river from us. And this issue intersects with Indian Point, in my opinion, because many proponents of Dan Scammer point to the closure of Indian Point and cite an inaccurate need to replace the energy coming from that plant. So not only is the wrong solution to turn to fossil fuels, but we are being asked to bear a greater burden by subjecting environmental justice communities to hosting these polluting plants that will be with us for decades to come, when we should be looking for renewable energy sources with storage and efficiency. So that is a brief update from the city of Beacon. I'm very keen to hear about what is on everybody else's mind, especially as this plant winds down. I think it'll be very important for all of us to stay really connected and keep making our voices heard so that we are getting justice for our community. So back to you, Lisa. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Amber, for keeping it brief. And last but not least, we have Jean Bergman from We Act in New York City to finish off our community presentations.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, everybody who has spoken so far. This has been truly amazing. We Act for Environmental Justice was founded in 1988. We serve communities. We're located in Harlem, 40 miles from Indian Point. And we're grounded in the community, but we also do work on environmental justice at the state and federal levels as well. We were very glad to see that the Indian Point facility has finally been closed, and we share concerns that people in the community in the region have expressed about the safety of the decommissioning process. It's really mind-blowing that something like a nuclear plant would ever be built without any idea of how to resolve the problem of the incredibly dangerous waste that will endure for literally millions of years. But I guess they figured when they first constructed these that somebody would come up with a solution. At We Act, we've been working hard to address a variety of environmental justice issues in the New York City and greater metropolitan area. And these include extreme heat, toxins, a just transition for workers to clean renewable energy, and decarbonization. All of these issues intersect with the problem of nuclear power, and all of the communities who we work with could be potentially impacted by the decommissioning process. Nuclear power, as everyone has said, nuclear power and nuclear weapons, nuclear plant decommissioning are all environmental justice issues. The people who are living near nuclear plants and contaminated sites will continue to be exposed to environmental health risks relating to radiation and chemical contaminants, dangers that will persist for hundreds of thousands and even millions of years. Many of those exposed to nuclear power waste and testing are colonized indigenous peoples and racialized minorities. This raises clear environmental justice concerns. People and low-income people are effectively excluded from the regulatory licensing and siting processes of nuclear facilities. And there's been discussion even just here in the chat, as well as overall, about the problem of people getting their voices heard. It's so great to have some local elected representatives really fighting this fight, because poor and people of color are less likely to have the means to evacuate quickly in the event of a nuclear accident. Anybody who's been on traffic in New York City knows there is no way to get out of the city quickly. And as someone said earlier, you don't have the wherewithal to stay sheltering in place, which we had reason to learn about a year ago. Indigenous peoples' lands are used for mining and processing radioactive materials, and in many cases for the planned disposal of nuclear wastes. Here in New York City, we're kind of haunted by the fact of Indian Point and grateful that it's been closed, but uncertain about the implications of decommissioning, because it's far enough away to be out of sight and out of mind for many New Yorkers. And I think it's great that this project has incorporated WEACT and the activist community that we are part of. I really want to second Vanessa Agudelo's suggestion that we eliminate privately owned, investor-owned utilities. And one way to do that is to support the New York Build Public Renewables Act. We need public power, so there is not a profit reason for staying, for continuing to build climate killing and toxic energy production. And we need to remain committed to highlighting the risks and engaging and protecting the people we serve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean. So now we are going into breakout rooms. I know that we are running behind schedule, so we will cut them slightly shorter, but I believe they are pre-assigned by Matt. So yeah, Matt, do you want to go over the instructions with that?
Yeah, sure thing. So for the most part, folks who were have their own Zoom account were pre-assigned. And if not, then I will just put you in a specific group depending on region. So let's try that out now. Great, well, that went okay. Yeah. Mana, you there? Okay. Yeah, it's kind of slow at doing that.
There we go.
Okay. Mana, you there? Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming. I hope those conversations were somewhat illuminating to sort of talk with some of your neighbors about these issues, just because, you know, we tend to be a little isolated, especially these days, and we wanted this to be an opportunity for communities to come together to talk about these issues. So because we are over, if anyone has any questions that maybe some of our panelists could answer, if you can raise your hand either in the chat or just physically, then maybe we can answer some.
Matt, I would say, given the enthusiasm, if people are okay to give a 1 or 2 minute report back from the 4 groups.
Okay, yeah, sure thing. So if you are one of the presenters from those groups, if you could.
Maybe starting with New York City, just so we have an order, group 1.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, do you want to do it? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I know that one question that someone had raised had to do with terrorism and like how that site is kind of just like ticking time bomb if there were something to happen and that we didn't have any protection or any sort of protocol to go along with that. So that's just a lingering question that we had. I'm not sure exactly how to answer it.
And another thing that came up was that one of the participants, who is a New York engineer, was talking about many issues related to this. One is that basically New York has just swapped out nuclear for fossil fuels because we haven't transitioned quickly enough to nuclear, to renewable electricity generation. And he also made the point that he has looked closely at the numbers, and there is over $1 billion worth of overcharges for the decommissioning process. And we have his information. I think he's somebody that definitely should be involved in the project going forward.
Great. Group 2 was Rockland.
Yeah. Okay, I guess I should talk. I guess we only really had time for one question. It was from Dr. Gregory Simpson, and and I can only answer part of it. But the question was about, like, how does this affect EJ communities? And I was trying to say to him that New York State has been anticipating the closure of Indian Point since 2012, and it's called on energy producers to replace Indian Point's energy since that time through efficiency and renewables. And, you know, we've actually achieved that goal. And since 2017, since the agreement was signed, we've already replaced reactor 2's power. And while we're not going to have an immediate replacement of all the energy within the next year or so, that we're going to be able to replace the energy through renewables and energy efficiencies within the reasonable, and we're talking about months, if not just a year or so. But that's all that we got to go through. So,
well, there'll be more opportunity, because this is, as was mentioned, just the beginning. It's the kickoff. We'll be doing a lot of work on these topics over the summer. We'll get answers to everybody's questions as best we can. We'll maybe start a shared folder for relevant documents. And by fall, we should really have some conclusions and recommendations to share with each other and with the public and the media. Group 3, Peekskill.
Excellent. Thank you, Manager. Our group in the Peekskill, Cortland, Ossining area had a really good discussion. We had one discussion about Indian Point, decommissioning company Holtec. Really, it was a question of, is there anybody else? And obviously that is seems to be an answered question now that they're approved and will be the decommissioning company. But most of our breakout group, we ended up talking about another environmental justice issue along the Hudson River, and that's the diesel trains that are idling in the Croton yards, and the possibility of the trains transitioning over to electric. There's some discussion about the diesel engines on the Long Island Railroad being switched over, the engines being transitioned. So we'd like to see that over on the Metro North side as well. But those were our two main discussion points. And it sounds like the Metro North one is something we could have a whole discussion on and a whole big presentation. So I look forward to the future where we can talk about that issue.
Great. Thank you so much, James. Manna, you're on mute.
Just quickly, there are 2 other decommissioning companies that are very active. Holtec positioned itself as the only alternative, but that's symptomatic of the fact that you really have to question what they say. And let's see, the next group is Beacon Newburgh.
Hey, yeah, thank you, Manas. So I'll take it for our group. We had a nice, very intimate conversation, right? In terms of just, starting to conspire as sister cities, right? Dance Camera is our front yard. For Beacon, it's their backyard. And what we wanted to leverage up was we had a good conversation with Diana Zuckerman joining us, right? And how to combat the pressures that as electeds and as a policy-making body, like we're feeling, right, with the closure of Indian Point and the reactivation of Dance Camera, and how to best, have those hard community conversations with especially our brothers and sisters in the labor movement, right, and that tension that naturally exists there, and how to best involve, the future generations, right? So with Diana there, talking about how to involve the youth, and they're already working on some of those things. So I think we have a little work group next steps going on. It was more of an exchange than a question asking, and how do we continue to build that out? Because this is just, right, it's the 2021 version, and the work continues.
And there's lots of questions about the Decommissioning Oversight Board also, and the composition of it. We will keep everyone who signed up posted, and the information can be shared. We'll try to keep you very current, and we'll stay in touch with each other. We'll work in smaller groups over the summer and really try to build a network that has a high level of awareness and input. And I know that Richard Webster will take that input back to the Decommissioning Oversight Board. And once we get the names, we'll share that, and you'll be able to reach out. And I also want to say that Tom Congdon has promised that there will be robust opportunity for real-time public comment with this Decommissioning Oversight Board. And we're hoping that New York's will be a model for the rest of the country. So let's be sure that it is by doing our part. And Clearwater and others will be here to provide information, but also to listen, and to listen to what is going on. Some examples were just cited in each community, that by sharing it, it doesn't have to be just the folks from Peekskill and Croton worrying about diesel fumes, but it can be the whole Hudson Valley region. And I really want to take the time to thank every single presenter. You were so involved, so engaged, so spot on. And I really think that this is more than a project. I think this is a movement that we can all join and be part of, and can change society. This is the time. There's going to be federal funding. There's going to be state funding. Let's be sure we know about it and we put it to good use. Any other burning desires or last minute questions or comments? And I especially want to thank Lisa Smart. She's a college student, an intern at Clearwater, and look how beautifully she moderated today. And Matt for all the technical support, and each one of our wonderful speakers and participants.